The year is 1945. Europe stands at a crossroads, its cities scarred by years of relentless conflict. The world holds its breath, waiting to see what the future will bring after so much devastation. The guns of Europe have finally fallen silent, their thunder replaced by an uneasy calm. The smoke lifts from shattered battlefields, revealing landscapes forever changed by war. Across the continent, victory parades fill the streets. Flags wave, music plays, and people pour out to celebrate the end of a nightmare. After 6 brutal years, Nazi Germany is defeated. People celebrate with tears and laughter, clinging to hope for peace and a new future. For many, it feels like the dawn of a new era, but even as the world rejoices, a new shadow looms, not from a defeated enemy, but from a powerful ally, the Soviet Union under Joseph Stalin. The victory is bittersweet as uncertainty creeps in. The Red Army, having liberated Eastern Europe from Nazi rule, does not withdraw. Instead, it occupies countries like Poland, Hungary, and Czechoslovakia, raising new questions about freedom and sovereignty. Winston Churchill, who led Britain into war to protect Poland's freedom, now watches in dismay as Poland and its neighbors fall under Soviet control. The ideals he fought for seem to be slipping away. He fears Stalin's ambitions won't stop at Eastern Europe's borders. The Red Army's presence feels less like liberation and more like occupation, and Churchill senses a new threat rising. The alliance that won the war is fracturing under mistrust. Tensions simmer at conference tables as old friends become wary rivals, each questioning the other's intentions. Churchill now views the Soviet Union as a long-term threat to European freedom. He warns that the peace so dearly won could be lost to a new form of tyranny. The vast Soviet military machine now stands deep in Europe, its tanks and troops a constant reminder of Stalin's power. Churchill worries it could keep advancing west, threatening the fragile peace. The ideals of communism now clash openly with the democratic values of Britain and the United States. The world is dividing into opposing camps, each suspicious of the other's motives. Churchill doubts Stalin will honor agreements made at Yalta. Promises of free elections and self-determination seem hollow as Soviet influence spreads. He envisions an iron curtain descending across the continent, splitting Europe into East and West, freedom and oppression. The relief of victory is mixed with dread. The political landscape is dangerously unstable. People sense that a new struggle is beginning, one that could shape the world for generations. Britain, exhausted and isolated after years of war, feels vulnerable. Its people are weary, its resources stretched thin, and its leaders uncertain about the future. Churchill believes urgent action is needed to counter the Soviet threat. He gathers his advisors, determined to defend the hard-won peace. He asks his military chiefs to consider the unthinkable, a plan to confront the Soviets if necessary. The world stands on the edge of a new and dangerous era, where yesterday's allies could become tomorrow's adversaries. In spring 1945, Churchill secretly asks his top planners for a contingency plan, a possible war against the Soviet Union. The codename is fitting, Operation Unthinkable. Churchill fears Stalin will not stop expanding, and the West must be ready to act even militarily. The British Joint Planning Staff is tasked with this, working in absolute secrecy. The objective assess if the Western Allies could impose their will on the Soviets, especially to secure a free Poland. Operation Unthinkable is not just a plan, but a detailed analysis of military options. The planners must consider how such a war could be fought and if it could be won. The Red Army is a formidable force, and any conflict would be massive. The plan is both a tool of diplomacy and a desperate gamble in the shadows of peace. Operation Unthinkable was divided into 2 distinct parts, offensive and defensive blueprints, each reflecting the high-stakes uncertainty of the post-war world. The offensive plan was bold and risky. It called for a sudden coordinated Allied attack against Soviet forces with the aim of driving them out of Germany and Poland before they could consolidate their hold on Eastern Europe. The ultimate goal was to force Stalin's hand, to compel him to guarantee the independence of Eastern European nations, especially Poland, whose fate had become a symbol of post-war freedom. The plan was audacious, even desperate, envisioning the use of 47 Allied divisions and, controversially, the rearming of German troops to join the fight against the Soviets. Just months after the end of the war in Europe, the strategy relied on deep armored thrusts into Soviet-occupied territory, targeting key cities and supply lines, hoping to catch the Red Army off guard and force a rapid retreat. But planners also considered a grim alternative, the defensive blueprint. What if the Soviets, emboldened by their victories, decided to invade Western Europe? In this scenario, Allied leaders outlined how to hold the line as long as possible, protect Britain at all costs, and conduct a fighting retreat if forced back by overwhelming Soviet strength. The defensive plan acknowledged the sheer scale of Soviet manpower and armor, recognizing that the Allies would be outnumbered and outgunned in a direct confrontation. If attacked, the Allies expected to be pushed back across the continent, with the survival of Britain itself becoming the central objective, a last bastion against Soviet advance. Naval and air campaigns would become absolutely crucial, aiming to prevent a Soviet crossing of the English Channel and to keep supply lines open. These plans revealed not only Britain's vulnerability, but also the grim reality of facing a new, powerful threat so soon after the devastation of World War II. The military planners' conclusions were stark and sobering. Operation Unthinkable was, by almost every measure, nearly impossible to execute. The challenges they faced were not just daunting, but overwhelming, casting a shadow over any hope of success. The Soviets held a staggering advantage, fielding over 170 divisions compared to the Allies' 47, and possessing far more tanks and aircraft. Their sheer numbers and firepower would have dwarfed anything the Western Allies could muster in Europe at that time. Meanwhile, the United States was deeply engaged in the Pacific, fighting a brutal campaign against Japan. American resources, attention, and public support were all focused on ending the war in Asia, making the prospect of opening a new front in Europe highly uncertain and politically risky. Without unwavering and full US backing, the plan was doomed from the start. Allied unity was already fragile, and any hesitation from America would have crippled the operation before it began. In Britain, public and political opposition was overwhelming. The nation had just celebrated the end of a long and devastating war. People yearned for peace, not the prospect of another bloody conflict. Soldiers, too, expected to return home to their families, not to be redeployed against a former ally. The idea of fighting the Soviets, who had just helped defeat Nazi Germany, seemed unthinkable to many. Morale among the troops would have collapsed if they were suddenly ordered to fight the Soviets. The psychological toll of such a reversal would have been immense, undermining any hope of sustained military effort. Even if the Allies managed to launch an initial offensive, a swift and decisive victory was highly unlikely. The terrain, the enemy's strength, and the lack of clear objectives all pointed to a drawn-out and costly campaign. The Red Army could simply retreat deep into the vast Russian interior, drawing the Allies into a war of attrition that could drag on for years, just as Napoleon and Hitler had experienced before. Britain's resources were already stretched to the breaking point. The country was exhausted, its cities bombed, its people weary, and its economy in shambles. Another prolonged war was simply unsustainable. The military planners, after weighing all these factors, warned in no uncertain terms that launching Operation Unthinkable was not militarily sound. The risks far outweighed any potential gains. The obstacles, military, political, and public, were simply too great to overcome. Every avenue led to dead ends, resistance, or disaster. In the end, the plan was shelved, recognized for what it truly was, a fantasy born of desperation, not a realistic path forward. The final report on Operation Unthinkable was a reality check for Churchill. Military chiefs declared the plan too risky and likely to fail. The Soviet superiority in troops and tanks made Allied victory improbable. Political winds shifted. Churchill lost the 1945 election, replaced by Clement Attlee's Labour government, which prioritized domestic rebuilding and de-escalation. The US tested the atomic bomb in July 1945, changing the strategic landscape. Nuclear deterrence replaced the need for massive land battles. Operation Unthinkable was shelved. Too dangerous, impractical, and politically impossible. It was a product of fear and uncertainty at war's end. With new leadership and the atomic bomb, the logic behind the plan collapsed. The plan was filed away, a testament to a crisis narrowly averted. The world stepped back from the brink, choosing containment and Cold War over a new hot war. What if Operation Unthinkable had been launched? At best, the Allies might have achieved initial success, pushing the Soviets back in Germany and Poland. But the Red Army's vast reserves would likely turn the tide. The conflict would become a brutal war of attrition, with cities destroyed and civilian casualties soaring. More likely, the Allies would be overwhelmed, pushed back to the Channel, and continental Europe could fall under Soviet control. Britain would face isolation and possible invasion. The human cost would be staggering, millions more lives lost, economies ruined, and hope for peace extinguished. Any outcome, victory, stalemate, or defeat, would plunge the world into a new dark age. The horrors of World War II would pale in comparison. Operation Unthinkable would have made the world's suffering far worse. Thankfully, it remained only a plan. Operation Unthinkable's consequences would have been global. A new war would spread beyond Europe, threatening British interests in the Middle East and fueling conflicts in Asia. It would be a true World War III with no clear end. The nuclear factor loomed. By August 1945, the US had the atomic bomb. Prolonged war would pressure the US to use it against Soviet cities, unleashing unprecedented destruction. The United Nations, just forming, would be stillborn. Economic recovery would be impossible. Endless conflict would replace post-war progress. The decision not to proceed was a recognition of these catastrophic risks. Churchill's planners showed the war was unwinnable and nuclear weapons raised the stakes. Leaders chose a tense Cold War over global annihilation. Cooler heads prevailed and the world avoided a direct, devastating conflict. After its rejection, Operation Unthinkable was locked away as top secret. For decades, the public knew nothing of Britain's plan to confront the Soviets. Revealing it during the Cold War would have been a propaganda gift to Moscow and damaged Western unity. The plan's secrecy also protected Churchill's reputation, revealing a ruthless side to his leadership. Only in 1998 were the documents declassified, stunning historians and the public. The files revealed the paranoia and fear at the war's end and how close the world came to another conflict. Operation Unthinkable is a lesson in the fragility of alliances and the dangers of preventative war. It shows the importance of sober calculation and restraint. The plan is a testament to the fears that shaped the Cold War's beginning. Ultimately, it's the story of a war that never happened, a reminder that sometimes restraint is history's greatest decision.